This mansion is for Thatcher. As for you, Gideon, with your mechanic's salary, you should just rent a room somewhere. You need to be realistic about your future. Thank you for watching this video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Gideon, and I am 29 years old. For my entire life, I was the invisible son, the permanent disappointment standing in the shadow of family royalty. My father, Harlan, sat comfortably at the head of our mahogany dining table. He was carelessly swirling a glass of incredibly expensive red wine. With those few casual words, he condemned me to a lifetime of struggle. Simultaneously, he handed my younger brother Thatcher a fresh cashier's check for $100,000. I just sat there staring down at my porcelain plate. The cheap brown gravy slowly congealed around my mashed potatoes. I worked grueling 12-hour shifts repairing heavy diesel machinery at an industrial yard. My knuckles are permanently scarred. My heavy work boots are scuffed down to the bare steel toes. And according to my own blood relatives, my entire future was nothing but a pathetic punchline. My mother, Lorraine, was practically vibrating with immense joy as she watched Thatcher inspect the check. Thatcher was 27, and he had just bankrupted his second cryptocurrency startup. Yet here he was, wearing a crisp silk shirt, being handed the staggering down payment for a sprawling suburban mansion. Harlan smiled, a smug expression of absolute pride radiating from his face. I kept chewing my food, forcing my face into a mask of complete indifference. I looked up at Thatcher's perfectly manicured fingers holding that massive check. I felt an icy calmness wash over my entire body. I smiled, a small, quiet, frozen smile, and nodded at my father. I agreed that I needed to be realistic. But little did they know, their mockery had just ignited a silent fire in my chest that would eventually burn their perfect little empire to the ground. The long drive back to my cramped apartment was a dark, quiet blur. As the streetlights flickered across the cracked windshield of my Ford Ranger, my mind involuntarily opened the heavy doors to my archive of rejection. Being the family scapegoat is a slow, agonizing process of systematic exclusion. When I was 17, I spent my entire summer in our sweltering garage rebuilding a discarded truck engine. I pulled the starter cord, and the heavy engine roared to life. Harlan barely looked at it. He checked his expensive gold watch, sighed heavily, and told me to clean up the mess because I was getting grease on his driveway. That very same week, Thatcher completely failed his college entrance exams. Instead of holding him accountable, Lorraine bought him a solid gold Rolex watch to soothe his fragile emotional state. The memories kept coming, each one colder and more profound than the last. When I was 23, a massive hydraulic press malfunctioned at the machinery shop. It fractured 3 of my ribs and collapsed my right lung. I lay in a sterile hospital bed, struggling to breathe, and called my parents for help with the staggering medical bills. Lorraine answered the phone from the deck of a luxury cruise ship. She sounded entirely annoyed by my call. She told me to put the medical debt on a high-interest credit card and simply hung up the phone. I watched my entire meager savings account drain down to absolute zero. I pulled my battered truck into the cracked asphalt parking lot of my apartment building and killed the engine. The sadness had burned away years ago. Now, all that was left was a cold, hard, razor-sharp clarity. I would become the predator in this family dynamic, and I would lay the perfect trap. My daily reality was a bleak, exhausting existence in a neighborhood where police sirens were constant. Every single morning, my alarm clock screamed at 4 o'clock. I moved massive engine blocks and repaired industrial hydraulic systems. For 5 long years, I had been living like a monk. I ate canned tuna and dry pasta almost every single night. My family thought I was chronically broke and utterly miserable. What they did not know was that I was ruthlessly hoarding cash. Over the course of those 5 grueling years, I had quietly amassed $75,000 in pure liquid cash. I was heavily arming myself with knowledge. While Thatcher was out buying expensive rounds of drinks at VIP clubs, I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table. I devoured every piece of information I could find on commercial real estate investing. That obsessive studying led me to Valerie, a local commercial real estate broker. A week later, she took me to see an abandoned commercial plaza on the edge of town. The massive parking lot was a jungle of tall weeds, but the foundation was rock solid, and the structural steel was entirely intact. I told her to write the offer immediately. As I signed the massive stack of paperwork, my phone buzzed with a photo from Lorraine. It was Thatcher standing in the grand foyer of his new mansion. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The trap was officially set, and the prey was entirely unaware. 2 weeks later, I pulled up to Thatcher's grand housewarming party in my battered Ford Ranger. The massive circular driveway was filled with shiny luxury SUVs. Thatcher walked over to me, holding a set of keys, and loudly demanded to borrow my truck to pick up a vintage dining table. I handed him the keys. When he returned 2 hours later, there was a massive, deep scrape running along the entire passenger side of my truck. He casually tossed the keys at my chest and laughed, claiming it was no big deal because my truck was already a piece of junk. Harlan walked out, looked at the damaged truck, and immediately took Thatcher's side. "You are causing a scene over a worthless piece of scrap metal, Gideon. You should ask Thatcher's Golf Club for a janitor application. It would help cover your little truck repairs." I froze. The sheer cruelty of the suggestion washed over me like a bucket of freezing water. I calmly picked up my keys from the concrete. I thanked him for the realistic advice. I got into my damaged truck and drove away without looking back. My romanticized vision of commercial real estate investing shattered exactly 1 month later. At 3 a.m, the owner of a small bakery in my newly acquired Plaza called me in a panic. The old roof was leaking severely. I spent 4 grueling hours on top of that flat commercial roof in a freezing, torrential rainstorm. I wrestled heavy waterproof tarps into place and sealed the breach with thick industrial roofing cement. By the time the sun started peeking over the horizon, my clothes were completely soaked through. The bakery owner stood in the dry kitchen, handed me a warm loaf of fresh bread, and thanked me profusely. Standing there in the cold morning light, covered in black roofing tar, I felt profoundly respected. That single moment became the absolute catalyst for everything that followed. Over the next 18 months, I worked like an absolute machine. I poured every single dollar of profit from the Plaza back into aggressive expansion. I bought a severely distressed medical office building and leased it out to a corporate dental practice. Then, I leveraged that asset to buy a massive industrial warehouse. My total portfolio value crossed the staggering $1.2 million mark. My pure passive monthly cash flow hit $12,000. I maintained my perfect facade flawlessly. I still drove my horribly scarred Ford Ranger. The sheer hypocrisy of my family reached its absolute peak during Thanksgiving dinner. Thatcher was complaining loudly about how the heavy property taxes on his mansion were draining his bank accounts. Lorraine sympathized, then turned her gaze toward me. She slid a $5 discount coupon for generic motor oil across the mahogany table. "Every dollar helps when you are struggling, right, Gideon?" I slowly reached my right hand into the inside pocket of my cheap jacket. My fingers brushed against a thick, freshly notarized commercial deed. The piece of paper in my pocket represented immense, unassailable wealth. I pulled my hand out of my pocket entirely empty. I picked up Lorraine's coupon, folded it neatly, and placed it in my wallet. I smiled, a completely genuine, icy smile. Little did they know, they were marching happily toward the snare. The massive explosion happened on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring. The State Economic Journal released their monthly cover story. The headline was written in massive, bold text. "From diesel mechanic to commercial real estate titan." The article detailed my entire journey, explicitly highlighting my commercial acquisitions and corporate holdings. At exactly 9 a.m, my phone began to vibrate violently. The masts were completely slipping. Harlan left 6 frantic voicemails in the span of 10 minutes. "Gideon, what is this article? Are you under federal investigation? If you are running a financial scam and federal warrants are issued, you will destroy this family's reputation." Their brains literally could not process the concept of my superiority. I simply typed out a single, definitive text message. "Everything in the publication is completely factual and legally verified. If you want to discuss it, meet me this Sunday night for dinner at 7 sharp." I dropped the location pin to my new private estate and turned the phone completely off. Sunday evening arrived with a biting chill in the air. I commanded the massive wrought iron gates of my property to slowly swing open. When I opened the heavy double oak front doors, Harlan, Lorraine, and Thatcher stood completely frozen on my expansive front porch. They were staring up at the vaulted ceilings and the custom glass chandelier in the massive foyer. Their jaws were practically unhinged. I led them into the formal dining room. Sitting directly in the center of the table was a singular, profound insult. I had prepared canned tuna and cheap dry pasta. They sat down mechanically, clearly in a state of deep psychological shock. Before Harlan could even formulate a sentence, the entire facade completely crumbled. Thatcher poured a massive glass of wine, his hands shaking violently, and downed it in one gulp. His arrogant face shattered into a mask of pure, staggering despair. I am completely bankrupt. The federal tax liens were filed yesterday. The bank is issuing the immediate foreclosure notices and eviction warrants on the mansion tomorrow morning. The revelation hit the dining room like a physical shockwave. The perfect golden child had secretly secured massive fraudulent loans against the mansion to maintain an illusion of wealth. Meanwhile, the despised mechanic had quietly built an impenetrable corporate empire. The arrogant patriarch who had dictated the family hierarchy for decades seemed to visually deflate right in front of me. Harlan slowly turned his gaze toward me, his eyes red and completely desperate. "Gideon, please, you have to wire the funds to clear his defaulted loans. You have to sign a deed of trust to save his mansion." I sat perfectly still. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon. "Years ago, you handed Thatcher a fortune, and you told your own flesh and blood to go rent a squalid room. When Thatcher destroyed my property, you told me to go scrub toilets at his country club." I leaned forward, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable power. "I did not just rent a room, Harlan. I bought the entire commercial district. You made your investment, Dad, and now you get to live with the absolute zero return on your portfolio. I do not throw good money after toxic, fraudulent assets. This dinner is over. Get out of my house." There was no more manufactured superiority. They slowly stood up, a procession of utterly broken people, and silently walked out of my estate. 6 months later, the poetic justice is completely absolute. The bank successfully executed the foreclosure warrants on Thatcher's mansion. With his credit completely destroyed and federal bankruptcy on his permanent record, Thatcher was forced to rent a tiny, squalid room. Harlan and Lorraine, having entirely drained their retirement accounts attempting to fight the federal tax liens, were forced to take up part-time retail jobs just to survive. I sit on the massive stone patio of my estate, looking out over the quiet, manicured grounds. I have completely cut off all contact with them. I have immense peace, ironclad financial security, and the profound knowledge that I forged my own crown from the very scraps they threw at my feet. That is the story of how silence and relentless hard work built an empire. What do you think about my final decision? Should I have signed the federal wire transfer to save my brother, or did they get exactly the catastrophic reality they deserved? Drop your verdict in the comments below. If you love this story of absolute karma, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a good revenge story. See you in the next one.